Welcome to the Autistic Delicatessen.
What you eat, what you drink is your story.
The Autistic Delicatessen.
Let me tell you something, the food is great.
What you eat, what you drink is your story.
The Autistic Delicatessen. Welcome to the Autistic Delicatessen. I am Onikage, and this is
Larnell.
Today will be another episode about community, activism, and sharing food for those in need.
And also from this, hopefully, this can help you be able to help out more in your communities. Because right now, in these tough times, we really need it.
Today's guest is Keith McHenry, an activist and co-founder of food+not+bombs. It's an all-voluntary group that aims to feed the hungry and build community. The group has shared free vegan and vegetarian meals in 1,000 cities in 15 countries as a protest against war, poverty, and damage to the environment.
Let me tell you something, the food is great.
Hello Keith, welcome to the Autistic Delicatessen.
Thanks for having me again. That's beautiful.
No worries. The first question is, explain more on food+not+bombs.
Okay, well, Food Not Bombs is a global organization, or it's really a collection of autonomous groups who all have three principles that connect us. And those principles are that the food is always free and vegan or vegetarian, and it's free to anyone, rich or poor, drunk or sober. The second one is that we don't have any leaders or hierarchical system or horizontally organized autonomous movement, which is active now in over 1,000 cities of the world and over 65 countries. And that we include the people that are depending on the food as part of our core membership in our local organizations, so that it's not like a hierarchy of the people that are serving the food versus the people that are eating. And the third is that we're not a charity, but that we're dedicated to nonviolent direct action to change society, so no one has to live in the streets or eat at a soup kitchen. And we started in 1980 in Boston, and it was just 8 of us, and it's now grown to this like global movement, which is right this second is dealing with the issue of police brutality and state repression in countries all around the world.
So obviously, Keith, right now we're dealing with COVID-19 and like police brutality cases with George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery. So what has Food+not+bombs been doing in those efforts?
Well, we actually have such a long history of that. For example, when we, not long after we were first arrested for feeding people in August of 1988, there was very brutal beating of us, but that was also at that time a police riot against ACT UP, where several people were badly injured. And there was an attack on peaceful protesters outside of I think it was a George Bush Sr. Lecture in downtown San Francisco. So our group united with others, our local Food Not+bombs chapter, with others to start a project called October 22nd, No Police Brutality Day. And so we've been organizing around that, and I'm one of the original founders of that movement. And so that's back in 88 and in the 90s, particularly the Rodney King uprising, of which I was had attended the peaceful protest. After the verdict in Southern California, I was at the protest in San Francisco, and it's something that people don't realize, that there was lots of anti-police brutality actions that evening across the country, but because we didn't really have Facebook or any of those things, people assume it was all in LA, but it was actually we were attacked by the police in San Francisco, and it became a major riot in mainly the financial district and downtown San Francisco. And that inspired another group of protests. It's actually, technically speaking, that was the catalyst for the October 22nd No Police Brutality actions. Then that grew Stolen Lives, where we tried to document all the people that were killed by police. And we after 10 years, we figured that there was the same as the number of U.S. troops killed in Vietnam were killed in the United States, and mostly people of color. And no coincidence, mostly the Black community was the target of lethal force. So we had, so this is going on and on and on. Now, today, we are active in protests all over the world against police brutality. And that's what's kind of an incredible thing about the murder of George Floyd, is it brought people together who are been getting, their community's been under attack and being killed. And for instance, attempts of protesting in the Philippines, which is very difficult. They're now facing a new law, a terrorism law, where Food Not Bombs themselves would be declared a terrorist group and could be subject to arrest. And already there's some worry that some of our volunteers have been arrested under that dictatorship. And of course, we had probably most prominently in the United States, Food Not Bombs were at the protest outside the White House that was cleared to make way for the speech or actually the holding up of the Bible by what's his name, Donald Trump. And so we were fortunately one of the the Food Not Bombs activists were sort of spared the worst of the tear gas on that day, because of some other activists were actually able to grab the tear gas canister and throw it back. And so that's and then we're organizing here in Santa Cruz a number of protests, and there's this very egregious crimes by our local police. Not only have they killed a mentally ill person, shot him, claiming that him swinging a rake in the middle of the night outside a neighbor's house was necessitated deadly force. So mental health issue. The other person that was shot to death in our county was a young man that was just on LSD, hiding in the bushes, and they attacked him with a dog, a number of dogs, and then and then they just blew him away. And we really this county is really frightening. So our chief of police is waging a vicious war against homeless people, and have corralled all the homeless into 6 different places in the community, which is ominous because it has a sense that they're going to truck everybody out of town. And they've been pushing them into very small spaces where it's likely to have that COVID would spread. But our chief of police became nationally famous for taking a knee at a protest that he helped manipulate into existence. And then he's getting all this kudos, he's on MSNBC and everything for like being the good cop that's not using riot police. And at the same time, for instance, right before this call, I get a frantic call from a homeless volunteer of ours who was freaking out because the police have now stopped him both yesterday and the day before. These are after the glorious dropping of the knee with the mayor at the Saturday's protest last week. And they're continuing this repressive attacks against homeless people. So the reality, we have one of the smallest African American communities in anywhere. This is a virtually completely white and Hispanic community, and they've been able to get the chief of police. We have a far right wing African American mayor, and then this very sophisticated, so to speak, PR-based chief of police. And but the reality is that homeless people are not, they've been demonized so successfully that the treatment of homeless people, and that includes Black homeless people, is just okay. It's not a problem. So sure enough, that not a lot of Black people are beaten up on the streets that are housed because there's very few housed Black people in our community. But Black homeless people are beaten by the police, as are all homeless. And so it's a kind of a frightening situation that an entire group and class of people many of whom have severe disabilities. In some cases, like I have like two friends that are in wheelchairs that get harassed by the police, it's very, very difficult situation for homeless people in Santa Cruz. And so the hypocrisy of Chief Mills and of Mayor Cummings is really sparking some resistance among people that are not snowed over. But liberal whites in Santa Cruz, they're just eating this up, that we've got the greatest police department in the world. And yet the very same people that are organizing vigilante assaults against homeless people are the ones that are on social media sharing this, videos of this police-sponsored marches and so on against police brutality. So it's a very Orwellian, frightening situation here, and I find that Food Not Bombs out, even in Malaysia, the Food Not Bombs chapters there are trying to deal with COVID-19 and are under repression by local authorities there. In Moscow, Russia, Food Not Bombs was arrested for trying to help provide food and sanitary supplies and protective equipment to homeless people outside the downtown, the main train station in Moscow. And so we're seeing this kind of thing as, there's a connection between police authorities trying to shut down Food Not Bombs, police authorities attacking homeless people and successfully dehumanizing homeless people, so that it's like Sonny, who is one of our dear friends who is Black, who lives here on the streets in Santa Cruz, has been saying now for several years that homeless is the new term for here in our community, and that's what appears to be the case. And it's really, really sad that entire community of people who is now growing in numbers can be dehumanized and abused by the police, by the same police who are getting complimented for their for placing a knee on the ground in solidarity with the protesters that they helped organize them. It's pretty shocking.
What you guys do, the theme for it is action, and it's amazing what you guys do, especially around the world, and especially for minorities, homeless people, especially homeless people. Doesn't matter where you are in the world, homeless people do get the shaft, and it's not fair. But when it comes to vegetarian, vegan foods, what kind of specific foods do you provide? Is it whatever you can find, or is there any specifics?
Yeah, so when we're in 1,000 cities, it can be it's always a different thing depending on your sources. So in the United States, we get our food from grocery stores and bakeries, and it's since it's vegan, it makes it so we don't need so much refrigeration and so on. So we will mostly make soups, but we also often make rice and beans and potatoes, things like that, and it's somewhat changed because of COVID. In some cities, they're now making like sandwiches and so on that they can put into to-go boxes and deliver. In Santa Cruz, we actually are still making, we serve every day. And we've been pushed around by the cops but they finally left us alone at our current address. And we're in a parking lot at a very high visibility intersection. And so the food that we've been having is almost always is rice, beans, a stew, salad, fruit salad, just fruit itself, lots of amazing breads. There's this very high-end bakery that's where the young people that work there totally support us, and they give us all their day olds, those kinds of things. And then we also will have like kind of like a trail mix that we got through Second Harvest that we can hand out. We make also coffee and tea now. We used to only have tea, but now basically it's like for people living outside in Santa Cruz, one of the big services that we have is fresh drinking water, because under COVID, the drinking fountains, which there was only one of anyway, and all the the 2 bathrooms that had water, those are shut down. You can't go into coffee shops and get water, although that may potentially end this week. So there's been really a lack of access to food and water for people during this COVID, and it's made it much more of an emergency, and that's why we've gone to 7 days a week. Now, I've noticed that in other cities, they like when I was for instance, in Indonesia and the Philippines, they have coconut-based soups is one of the things that they do, and they do rice, and they have tofu. They have beautiful tofu dishes. When in Germany, the Food Not Bombs chapters there had these amazing potato-based meals that they were putting out. So it all depends on the area of the world as to what the kind of food is, and it's usually in basically the local food that is vegan, and it's really interesting that how this having vegan principle, which is the food is vegan or vegetarian, has crossed from one culture to another, and that's also the interesting thing about Food Not Bombs. For instance, we had a Zoom meeting of groups of 25 or 22 people, on the first one. So often we'll do 2 Zoom meetings, one in the morning and one in the night in the United States time, so that all of our volunteers around the world can get involved. And we had the call to prayer on last night's Zoom meeting, during which some of the people that were not used to Islamic communities' traditions were wondering. You could see their expression; they're wondering what this sound was in the background, but that's what it was. And it's and then in Myanmar, there's the Food Not Bombs chapter there. Looks like their food is great. I've never been there, but they have like maybe 5 chapters there now. They've been working with the Rohingya to defend their civil rights, and they've had a very strict clampdown. So it's very, very interesting.
Real quick, going back to the first arrest in '88, it's interesting, Keith, that just to play devil's advocate, one would say, well, Keith, why didn't you get a permit? And then the other part of it is, well, why would you need a permit if all you were doing, you and Food Not Bombs, is just giving mutual aid to the community and serving food? So that, in my mind, it just boggles me that something like that would happen.
Yeah. Yeah, well, the thing that's really crazy is that the police actually sent somebody. We found a lot of this out after the arrest, but we were approached by a local, the director of a local soup kitchen in the Haight-Ashbury neighborhood, and told that we could get a permit if we wrote the Parks Department, and we did, thinking that there was nothing dangerous about that, and it turned out that was a ploy. They had actually threatened that poor guy with shutting down his soup kitchen if he didn't cooperate with the police. And they had no intention of giving us a permit, so we ended up that was just a way to get, oddly enough, my name, because they didn't really know who I was, and to figure out some kind of paper trail about Food Not Bombs, so it was really insane. It was really, really insane that they would do that to us, and that's what they did. That's they lured us into getting arrested, and it was just really, really a shame. Yeah, we were arrested 1,000 times in San Francisco after that. They beat us. I faced 25 to life in prison. It was a hardcore thing, and when they say, well, all you need is a permit, and eventually the mayor would say, all I had to do was apply for a permit. We applied 136 times for permits. They deleted the permit process, which is why they felt it was unnecessary to respond to our applications, and they just made the mention that they would just tell the media that because that was somehow that would justify the continued daily arrest of Food Not Bombs. And so we've had that direct experience with the police not really cooperating with us, and we actually did have some friends and ultimately in the department, and what ended the arrest was actually I would say a soft strike by non-cooperation by the rank and file, who just found it ridiculous that they would here they got a job as cops and now they're just arresting us for feeding the hungry, and they were getting sick of being yelled at by angry people for taking their food.
Sorry to hear about that, Keith, because you and the group at Food Not Bombs did not deserve that at all.
Yeah, it was just brutal. But in a certain sense, it backfired on them. It was because of that people, each wave of arrests, there was, like I said, about 90, I think it was 94 arrests, maybe 97 arrests in 88, and then there was another roughly 389, and then another 700 or more in the years after that when the second mayor came to power, Frank Jordan. And it was those arrests that inspired people to contact us to find out how to start Food Not Bombs. And I'd actually taken note on the first, when I started the second chapter in San Francisco in March of '88. And so when people started to send us letters, this before email and so on, I was able to send them what was a flyer I'd made based on my notes, called 7 Steps to Starting Food Not Bombs, and it outlines exactly how I did the San Francisco, the founding of the San Francisco chapter, and that became a template that chapters all over the world adopted. Then when we were arrested, for instance, in Tampa, Florida, there'd be a wave of concern. There became a whole series of food sharing laws across the United States that inspired more resistance. And then there was 2 waves of arrests in Orlando, Florida, because Anonymous did a whole campaign of taking over tourist sites in Orlando. That gained even more news. And then the Fort Lauderdale arrests, that because it was at the same time as I forgot. Arnold Abbott was arrested, a 92-year-old World War II vet and civil rights activist, was arrested. That also inspired more chapters. So there, on one hand, it just shows the naked hatred of the state against autonomous efforts, for sure. And because the autonomous efforts are a problem for them, because they can't drive the homeless out of sight. They tried that here in Santa Cruz when COVID-19 happened. The mayor and the chief of police tried to force us into the swamp to serve, or maybe 150 tents and people living down in this area. And it's partially for the purposes of making it look like there is no homeless people in Santa Cruz, so that the millions of dollars they get to help the homeless can be diverted into their own programs. And it's just such a transparent, actually maybe I shouldn't even call them weakest, the strongest and poorest in our community, because you have to be really strong to live in a town where the police harass you every hour and move you from street corner to street corner. And the reason they were able to get this encampment where they were trying to get us to share food so large is that you couldn't sit on a street corner or sit in a doorway or any place in town without at least an hourly IDing and harassment by the authorities. So the arrest of Food Not Bombs is essentially a very dramatic way highlighting what is actually a day in and day out policy of under capitalism. So, it just makes the rest of the egregious actions against people of color and poor people just more visible, because it's, everyone can understand that everyone has the right to eat. And our slogan is that food is a right, not a privilege. As is housing is a right and not a privilege, as is medical care is a right and not a privilege, as is education is a right and not a privilege. And in this country, in the United States, though that there is no support for that amongst the people that are looting the country, like Jamie Dimon and these other bankers and who are just destroying our country and seizing all the assets and money. And those looters are okay. There's nobody running them down and shooting at them. And so it's really frightening. Those are the real looters and the people that we should be bringing to justice.
I can totally see where you come from with that, and there's definitely a lot of corruption, especially in Western countries, whether it's the US, the UK. And it's just a complete mess at this point. But in a more positive note, totally unrelated to all this, what is your favorite food?
Okay, well, my favorite food, I really love tempeh. That's one of the things I make often. I do like rice and black beans. Then I try to stay away from this because I just can't. It turns me into having an eating disorder, and that is I make these quesadillas with diabetes, and I just love those. And I was able to gain 10 pounds just by my enthusiasm for them. So I really love them. So then I have to say that one of the meals I've so loved, and it has two parts to this why this meal I love. But when I got out of jail in Orlando for feeding people, one of our volunteers, Eric, who worked at a vegan restaurant, he made the most amazing vegan macaroni and cheese. Talk about comfort food. And then, of course, every vegan's dream, I think, is the perfect vegan pizza. And so that's it's kind of funny, those kind of things. But like for instance, when I've traveled in Guatemala and El Salvador, I just that's some of my favorite foods. But yeah, don't get me around these vegan quesadillas. I just I can't stop eating them.
What is it about food that it relates to activism? Like, through your years, like, being a part of and being the co-founder of Food+not+bombs.
Yeah, well, the food is something that brings everyone together, and it's and it's also very, very political. So the way the animal agriculture, for example, is a system of symptomatic of the violence and exploitation of the capitalist system, where animals are just commodities. Just like what we see recently in comments by the Trump administration that it's okay for workers to go back to work in the meatpacking plants or to restaurants and so on. And so, if they die, it doesn't make any difference because they're just, I forget the term that they were using, but they're, just part of what has to, about the capitalist system that we need. You can sacrifice workers, you can sacrifice animals. And so by sharing vegan meals out on the street, we're able to highlight that connection between the exploitation of workers and of animals and of the environment and this kind of a death culture, and so food in Food Not Bombs not only represents food, but it also represents health and well-being and sustainability and peace and nonviolence and those kind of things. But the food brings people together, and just like with the such a powerful social connection. If you go to somebody's house, people often offer food to their guests, or there's in Christianity, there's the Last Supper and the breaking of the bread during communion and so on. And then Ramadan, the breaking of the fast. So for Food Not Bombs, it becomes a way of highlighting the political crises and economic crises that our communities face. So people living out on the street have to search for food. They can't cook often because it's illegal to make fires and so on outside. So they're dependent upon soup kitchens and handouts. It just it shows that hoarding in Wall Street and in the banks, and so I think that's it's a very good for that. And at the same time, the other aspect of it is that it brings communities together. And when we first started, one of the things that we found so interesting and so positive, which we have has been core to the Food Not Bombs movement ever since, is the idea that when you slow down to have a meal, you will end up talking to one another and coming up with all kinds of new ideas and really spending the time contemplating how a lot of these meals that we come up with a huge number of abandoned buildings that are while people live outside. And so we, for instance, San Francisco took over 400 buildings that we put our own locks on and housed people in 100 of them. Or indie media, when that came about through conversations while eating food at Food Not Bombs meals in front of San Francisco City Hall. Or the October 22nd No Police Brutality Day grew out of conversations at our meals. Food Not Lawns, same thing. So it's a way of building community, and at first it was more that it was mostly that focus because there wasn't that many homeless people, but now it's become survival as well. And so, for example, in Santa Cruz, there was virtually no food for people that lived outside. And therefore, Food Not Bombs stepped up and we did the meals 7 days a week. Now there's a bit more food for people to live outside if they're forced into the local shelters and so on. But people that are not forced into the shelters have no access to food. And so we are that food. So that has also built political solidarity amongst large parts of the community, and where they know that we are there for everyone, and that we're focused on what people really need, things like food, a safe place to sleep, clothing, the things that this local government, which is one of the wealthiest communities in the world, refuse to provide. In fact, the city not only doesn't provide these things, they confiscate these things from the people that live outside and deprive them of even the comfort of a blanket or a sleeping bag by confiscating. They spent over $300,000 last year stealing people's belongings. We spent hundreds and hundreds of dollars replacing the belongings stolen by the city. And so that food is essential. Then the other thing is that we've really been organizing for supporting the organics movement because of the chemicals and poisons and pesticides in factory farming. We've also been supporting the fact that sustainable agriculture, most people are actually fed by women in the world. There's big combines and mega agriculture in the United States is actually not feeding the world, contrary to the propaganda. And according to the World Food Organization, much of the food, I think some people estimate 50% of the food that people consume in the world is on sustainable farms that are organized by women. So so it's a microcosm is the whole food system, and it's one where we can then at the same time not only show the failure of this economic system and political system, but we can also build community.
You basically hit the nail on the head there with the whole food and community, how it brings people together. And funny enough, me and Larnell have shared that as a recurring theme unintentionally in our podcast and our video series. And it's just, doesn't matter what medium you do, if you share food with people, it just creates something amazing.
Yeah, definitely, and really like what you've been doing, and really what you've been doing for years and all that stuff, because here on our show we highlight different types of food, we talk to different types of people. But the thing I appreciate about the group of Food Not Bombs is that you all in different chapters are able to go out there, be able to give food to the protesters, give food to the homeless, give food to people that truly need it, because again, it's all about mutual aid as well as humanitarian aid all mixed into one and all that stuff, because even myself, I helped out with nonprofits and churches to, give back to the community when it comes to food or clothes and all that type of stuff. So
yeah, it's been pretty, it's intense, the organizing, but I think, we just celebrated our 40th anniversary, May 24th. And what is interesting is that that's in the middle of a COVID crisis, and I believe it's the day that they killed George Floyd, or the day before, and so it's a new time, and hopefully people are the inequities and are just come to the fore, and that these protests won't stop until there is actually real change.
So Keith, how should people know more about Food Not Bombs?
Well, you can go to food.not.bombs.net, and we have there the hunger hotline, which is our 1-800-884-1136. Or then you can also reach us at our email menu@foodnotbombs.net. And if there are new chapters starting all the time, you can get information on how to start a new Food Not Bombs chapter in your community. You can also contribute. There's a donation button if you want to contribute. There is also a map, a link called Locations, and you can 800 or 900 of the 1,000 chapters listed on that page. And you can, if you contact me at the toll-free number or at menu@foodnotbombs.net, I can hook you up with the local organization that you could either volunteer with, or I can provide you materials to help start a local chapter in your community.
Well, Keith, we would just like to thank you for being a guest on the Autistic Delicatessen and really sharing with us your experiences, as well as, the group Food Not Bombs, and definitely appreciate you and the group, as well as continuing to give back to the community.
I love being on your program, and I will look forward to coming on again.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Let me tell you something, the food is great.
Well, we hope you've enjoyed this episode of the Autistic Delicatessen. If you want to know more about the show, please go on to the autisticdelicatessen.card.co.
If you enjoyed this video, feel free to subscribe for future content.
And until next time,
What you eat, what you drink is your story.